Hello and welcome to the next episode of our Investing with Impact series. Today I'm joined by Dr Nina Skorupska, who is CEO of the REA. Nina, welcome to the programme.
Thank you for inviting me. A pleasure to be here.
Well, there's a number of topics we wanted to get through, and clearly things that are very important to us. Foresight is a sustainable investor, both heavily headquartered here in London in the UK, but also internationally as well. And there's a number of really key topics that I think we'd like to sort of chat through with you, especially at the time very pertinent to ongoing discussions and where we are in the current cycle. But I think it's just worth a little bit of a recap maybe for a start in terms of just to hear from your perspective how important the role of renewable energy or renewable electricity generation in particular has been in the drive towards net zero. So I know if we go back all the way to 1991, sort of in the last 30 years, the share of generation of renewable electricity was about 2%. By 2013, we got to about 14%. And as of last full numbers in 2021, we got to about 41%. So it's been the last decade has been a real sort of leap forward, but there's still plenty to do. Just interested in your views on that.
Oh, well, a whole number of areas have evolved over this last decade. So many people's attitudes and views of the importance of renewable energy have been reinforced. You know, the Committee on Climate Change, who ensure that whichever government is in power here in the UK must now deliver net zero. So in this last decade, you know, the government has committed here in the UK to be net zero electricity by 2035. So renewable power, renewable electricity must play and is vital in delivering all of that. And it's all forms of renewable electricity. I think we could go faster. And I think there are a whole number of different areas where we know this government could do better.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I think a number of the things is we as an investor, particularly those funds that we've got. So I help run the Foresight Solar Fund. So we're very much investing in UK solar or looking to along with battery storage as well, which I think the UK is a very good market for and hope to see that develop into other countries as well nearby. But I think there are a few, with all the good news that we've got so far, like you say, it's net zero for a generation by 2035. There's still a lot to do here at the moment, and that's only 12 years away. It might be worth it just talking about some of the short-term and longer-term barriers to achieving that. I mean, one thing that comes up a lot in the discussions that we're having at the moment is the grid in the UK.
Yes.
And there's a lot. It was a grid that was set up for, I think, to be fair, a lot of large historic coal or large power stations were now going to a more decentralized grid and needing to add on a lot more capacity, but at probably smaller amounts, dotted in various locations and places that they never were before.
Well, you're right. For the last 5 years in particular, we've been working with, as a trade association representing renewable energy, power, heat and transport, but power in particular. We've been working with all the different grid companies, the regulator and government to really ensure they understand how important getting the infrastructure right is going to be vital to delivering all of the net zero generation. Of course, this government also supports nuclear and also sometime in the future thinking of carbon capture usage and storage linked to maybe 1 or 2 fossil generators that may still have a role to play. But I would argue the systems, the processes, the business models that we need today could deliver the technologies that are available, like you mentioned, solar and more offshore wind and onshore wind, and supported with forms of energy storage, battery as well as others, can really accelerate. We've had a revolution in terms of what people think of how electricity can be delivered. With the growth of EV charging infrastructure, which is closer to people's homes, we know that the grid has to be resilient and available to deliver. Unfortunately, we're hearing some terrible stories about people with fantastic solar projects taking, 10 years to get a connection. So some of our members are seeing that, they make and put in a connection bid, and they're seeing dates as far into the future as 2037, which actually doesn't quite align with that net zero ambition, does it? So something's got to change, and we've been arguing with government what some of those things could be.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I think we've definitely seen that, particularly on Foresight Group more widely. We're looking at a lot of battery storage projects at the moment. I think we're sort of fortunate through the connections that we've had to secure a lot of sort of near-term dated projects at the moment that will be coming through in the next couple of years. But a lot we're hearing about is from developers that if we're not already into the planning cycle, it will be after 2030. And I think the battery storage is going to be absolutely key for the UK. We don't have huge amounts of hydro, although we are developing a plant in Scotland, but I think the UK is an isolated island, really, in some ways. We've got the interconnectors, we've got other things, but battery storage is going to be very important to balance out that the intermittent renewable generation.
Well, as the REA, I'm going to blow our trumpet a little bit. We were the first to really bring to the table all forms of energy storage. We did the studies back in 2015, 2016 to argue what's the value of having a smart system that is flexibly operated. So the concerns of the variability of solar and wind can be assuaged by the fact that we will have these new technologies. So as tech has evolved, we're able to look at how you can play these different technologies. But what's been the delay is the regulatory and the policy landscape to enable us to take advantage of that. It's been a hard-fought journey that, fortunately, maybe 2019, the government did publish its Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan and realised there was something in the region of 40-odd key objectives that they had to tackle, like even recognising what energy storage was and get that into a legal framework. And, that is still going through the Houses of Parliament now to have energy storage recognised as a subsector of generation in terms of how it's treated in contract and in law. So it's been a long journey, and the scary thing is it's 2023 and we heard the date of the ambition of 2035. So much more needs to be done. Promise of a future electricity system operator, that should have been in play back in 2020. But really, after my small period of crying over spilt milk, I shouldn't. We have to look forward and say we need to accelerate all of these elements. A system operator who understands transmission and distributed plays in the market, a market that really does support and rewards people for doing the right thing, decarbonised and flexible services. And then also the fact that all of this, solar, and I'm sure you'll come on to this, is one of the cheapest form of generation. And even combined with energy storage systems, the market should be starting to reward that and be doing the right things.
Absolutely. No, there's a couple of things to pick up on there. I think the regulatory framework is something we can touch on a little bit later, because there is some key studies going forward at the moment. And absolutely agree. I mean, although there's been a lot of focus on offshore wind in the UK, solar and onshore wind as well remain the cheapest sources of renewable power and are quick to deploy. I think just to pick up on the point on battery storage there, and I think the REA's support for that has been key. Looking on a bit more of a positive note on that, in some ways the UK has been quite a success story in terms of battery storage and the investment into that sector. I think one thing that's helped there is that it's clear at the moment where energy storage fits within the regulatory framework at the moment, because there may be changes coming down. So that is something that I think if we were to take a positive out of things, that the UK does seem to be ahead of other markets. We're starting to see it come through in mainland Europe now.
To have energy storage recognised in the capacity market,
yeah,
much as that was a small battle to get it there, is actually recognised, and energy storage can play its part there. So there are market mechanisms, and some of the distributed network operators have gone out for auctions to find ways of delivering flexibility services. And whilst the terms of the contracts, we would always want them to be longer, 15 years or so, we've argued that a 1-year prompt market role wasn't quite right. And so they helped ensure that we could see some reward for battery storage in this short term. But I think one of the aspects that's going to be interesting, as you mentioned, you might be involved in pumped hydro or hydroelectric, is the longer duration energy storage and the play we have to see of how the role of battery storage interplays with our need for longer duration energy storage. Because I think everybody's aware, everybody's always arguing about what do we do on that coldest of cold days when the wind's not blowing and obviously the sun may not shine as much as we would like. How do we then deal with the fact that we cover generation and the increasing demands we'll see into the future as we electrify everything? So there's a lot yet to work through, but UK is a fertile ground for having that investment and getting all the rules and regulations sorted.
Well, I think that's a very good point at which to just get on to the UK itself and competition at the moment, because there's quite a lot of, the UK has been a leader in many areas in terms of broader infrastructure over the years that it's exported around the world. Yeah. And has been, if we think about it, we are a leader in offshore wind as well, with the support that government's brought through that. So there are, again, there's positives, but it's about maintaining this going forward. And there are headwinds out there as well. So clearly there is we've seen IRA in the US, which is 370 billion that's going towards subsidies there. The EU is looking to respond with their Green Deal as well to that. Do you have thoughts? Is there a risk here that the UK ends up getting left behind if it doesn't have something to compete with those huge amounts of subsidies and investment?
Well, we always hold the mirror up to our government. The REA for the last 4 years has done a report called the Energy Transition Readiness Index. And whilst the UK, as you say, has been a leader with ambition, I mean, we hosted COP26 in Glasgow and have been driving the legal statutes that are required on it. But now we need the action to really show that the deployment, and with that is assurance around stability of policies and that there is a route to market for people to be able to make money. You know, the energy market, in order for it to deliver this net zero ambition, has to have a thriving market, and it's quite up in the air at the moment. The energy crisis last year, I think, was quite a telling moment of how this government was going to respond in creating this certainty. So our work all the time is around arguing with government, but you really need to create that framework that people feel certainty, that they can place their bets on the UK and that we will deliver that framework for people to have welcome returns. Very
helpful, Nina. And I think something that I can probably touch on a little bit here myself, but a sort of investment appeal of the UK. It'd be interesting to hear what you're hearing from other members apart from ourselves. But I think just historically, the UK has always been a very fertile investment ground. I think the sort of the good rule of law and the legal framework around things, and actually to date, I think in terms of continuation of policy and respecting previous things such as the subsidies that have come through. Grandfathering, all that kind of thing. So, I mean, we've still seen significant demand out there, and for historic renewable projects still seem to trade hands at a very competitive rates. I think, if anything, the one thing we have seen a bit of a slowdown in investment and number of projects being brought through, and speaking to developers, that it is a little harder. I guess the macroeconomic environment doesn't help us at this stage. But what are you hearing from other members about attractiveness of sort of UK as an investment destination at the moment? Well,
they are mixed signals. It depends on what level. So, for instance, for projects that are delivering direct to the consumers and to commercial and industry, the energy crisis and energy security and the push for more homegrown energy, I mean, absolutely, that shouts to the real benefit of renewable electricity projects is homegrown, fast to deliver, secure, no reliance then on imported fossil fuels. So on one hand, that is a real clarion call to say yeah, we want that and we're creating the frameworks in order to deliver this. But then on the other hand, when the other aspect of the energy crisis was the introduction of the electricity generator levy, which started to cause a little bit of doubt around government interference on projects existing and future plan. So we saw a pause by many of our members, just wanting to see a little bit more certainty around, well, what does the EGL mean? Because it isn't just for the year or so. There is some aspects in the law which means that the government could choose to intervene all the way through to 2028 and introduce some form of levy on profits for generators, many renewables. But obviously in the work that we did with the government in 2022, which was a crazy year for a number of different reasons, as well as the awful war in the Ukraine, we need the government to understand that if it wants to be seen as the champion for net zero, then the generators, particularly from renewables, has to be treated in as a fair way as it is done for the fossil sector as well. So any levies, taxes, or discounts or schemes, you know, the government needs to not hide behind energy security as to why they treat the oil and gas sector in one way and then refuse to give some further tax benefits to renewable generators who are doing the right thing. And more often than not, their profits are going to be recycled and reinvested into even more decarbonised power projects. So I kind of called it a bit of schizophrenia here, you know. So on one hand, they want to do this, and on the other hand, they're doing some crazy aspects of it. So it's been a busy time for us to try and resolve what all those different aspects are. And with the support of our members and their voices as well, hopefully we can find our way over the next 6 months. You're right, the general election will get the parties making claims and promises again. And our job as a trade association is to really go through and read between the lines and find out what's practically going to be done.
That's very interesting, and I think from our perspective as well, in terms of the EGL payments that we see we'll be making, I mean, I think those of us who are investors in renewable energy, nobody was expecting these prices at all, and would happily have traded them away for more certainty over the longer term, which is the case of a lot of infrastructure. I think it's just clear that is taking away from investment that we could be putting into new projects.
No. I agree. I mean, you'll be absolutely aware of the review of the electricity market arrangements and
Yes.
REMA, and that had been kicked off back in March last year, just as we became aware of the Ukraine war and then the sudden push and pulls of concerns around energy security. And we've heard the Secretary of State now in the newly formed Department for Energy Security and Net Zero really concerned about how do we get consumers and businesses to benefit from cheaper renewables, which are secure and homegrown. So REMA and also the discussions around the EGL all have to come together to create that environment for the investors to look at the UK and say, I will invest here. When we did our survey last year with the early unfolding of the energy crisis, people were still saying it was better in Europe because they were seeing that those frameworks were putting significant money and bringing in policies and clear regulatory statements that these things will and must be done. We need to see exactly the same here in the UK.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned REMA there. I think that is something that from the investment standpoint, if we need greater clarity on before long. I was speaking on a panel the other week with actually a member from DES talking about it, and they're hopeful to come back with some further clarity later this year. But I think everybody from the investor side would greatly welcome, because it's still, there's a lot of options still on the table with REMA at the moment, and it's bringing quite a bit of uncertainty.
Well, our members have been so concerned and have worked with us where we've taken some real deep views around all the different options of how to consider all the different layers of the market and how they interplay for existing developments as well as for future. And the conclusions are it has to be an evolution rather than a total revolution of a new system, because that would just create even more uncertainty. We just haven't got the time to create a brand new, but we do have to address the aspects of how the market is linked to a gas price that's internationally traded. So how can we make better of the contracts for difference mechanisms that the UK is famous around the world for introducing and helping move the renewables agenda forward? But how do we make it the right tool for today and the future?
No, I think that's I think the general feeling there is especially from industry side and investors, there's absolutely understand the need for review of the electricity market. But like you say, some of these implementing radical reforms could take us out to 2030, yes. By which point then the issue is getting the investment in when there's no certainty there.
And I mean, what we've seen is with the cost of technologies like solar and, as you said earlier, offshore wind, we've seen the prices for this technology to come tumbling down. It's now not an issue around the cost, it's more about all the other aspects of delivering the projects. And we have to find a market mechanism and all other frameworks which makes us able to accelerate that deployment. It's great to realise that all government and even the general public in the main understand that renewables are not the expensive option anymore, as was made out, as you mentioned, 1991 and earlier, a decade ago. So that's a success. It's now about us being clever enough to bring to bear all those other aspects which will accelerate deployment now.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it sort of takes me nicely as the next point of sort of what does the uptake of renewable power, electricity generation mean for power prices now? I think those of us on the investment side, we've seen from if you sort of take off, we've been through very irregular times over the last sort of few years. We've had the pandemic where actually power prices were on the absolute floor because of lack of demand, up to the stratospheric heights of the last few years that nobody was expecting or had baked into any of the forecasts. But all the power curves that we see, and it's in many ways for the country as a whole, it's good to see that power prices are coming down from those peaks and more down. But everything that we see is that the power curves are predicated on large renewable generation are bringing those power prices down in the future.
Yeah.
How important do you think that is for the uptake and for that general message to the public as a whole?
So the messages are important for the different stakeholders. So for the general public and everybody experiencing the energy bills that they've had to encounter over the last winter, we need the power prices to come down because we want the country to electrify and do more. You know, each individual, we want them to switch from using fossil gas for heating to considering a heat pump where there's an element of needing renewable power or net zero power to support it. We need all the cars, the 36 million car park that we enjoy just in cars and light commercial vehicles to be switching over to be EVs. Maybe less of them on the roads because there are other solutions as well, but mainly EVs, and we'll need electricity. So the modelling of anticipating what will happen over the next decade up and down needs to be, you know, who saw 5 years ago where we would be today? People were in denial and thinking we wouldn't get to over 40%. So is the more renewables and the lower costs going to cannibalise the price curve and therefore make the market look not attractive for investors? So we've got to create the right market that doesn't see us having these swings in attitudes. So what could be the role of a future CFD, and could everybody who's on other agreements and being able to peg their power purchase agreements as becoming even more popular now to a different kind of reference price that allows that continued confidence in investment but sees it still being attractive for the consumers and for industry? It's a complicated and complex area, but there's no shadow of a doubt in my mind more renewables is the answer. And to make the UK as attractive as possible is what the government is wanting to work on, but we need to hold their feet to the fire to make sure that they do it.
Yeah, and that's, I think, part of the dilemma that you refer to there between sort of energy security, price for consumers, and also being able to attract the investment to build it in the first place. There's a fine balance between all those things,
Ross,
isn't it?
yeah.
Yeah, I think it just takes me on to the last point. I think the really coming back to a little bit on the challenges and where you see them. There was the windfall tax that you spoke about earlier, and I know there was an article you put out at the end of last year that was sort of saying that it could be quite damaging to investment in the UK. But do you think with the power prices coming down and the effects of the EGL now probably being less going forward, as we have seen power prices drop off, in some ways, do you see that as big a challenge now as international competition, or the uncertainty from things such as market reform, or are they all on an equal pegging for you?
I mean, they're all in the mix, really. Coming to the point around windfall tax and how does it sit with comparing with other aspects that create certainty here in the UK for investment further in renewables. I think the government are missing an opportunity to clarify even further about how the UK is open for investment. I go out and stand on platforms and say, you know, the UK has done remarkably well over the decade, and the plans are in place and the ambitions are in place that we want to do even more. That net zero ambition is fantastically out there like a beacon light. UK is open for business for renewables, but we're tending to get mixed messages from some of the legislative frameworks and announcements from government. I think they've used the energy security concerns as a way of still keeping the oil and gas sector alive here in the UK. I mean, I come from a background of working in fossil. My doctorate's in coal combustion. This transition really has to happen faster, and therefore we need absolutely crystal clear signals that the UK will deliver that net zero ambition and should not be obfuscated. So windfall tax, why not make sure everything is on a par and equal in the way that the different elements of the energy sector are treated? Why can't generators be and see a quicker response and a benefit in terms of support for innovative funds and getting that tax benefits in the same way the oil and gas sector? It's a simple question in my part, but the argument back from government and the minister himself is that the renewables is subsidised. No, don't you think the oil and gas sector got subsidised along the way in their journey to grow it to the state that it is today? So for me, it's a non-argument or a non-argument the reason why more can't be done. So all we need is statements, clarity, policies in place to really make sure that the regulator, Ofgem, plays its fair role now. Being technology neutral is not an argument anymore. The technology neutrality has to be across net zero organised technologies. Fossils shouldn't even be considered anymore.
Right, and Nina, on that, I think in terms of that point about all renewables being subsidised, I think if there's certainty, there can be a lot more subsidy-free solar built out as well. There's a burgeoning market there for corporate PPAs that we were seeing come through that would actually take some of that pressure off government, and the battery sector is moving ahead completely subsidy-free.
It is.
In terms of that, really. I mean,
the sector has never argued for subsidies for battery or energy storage. We might need some support mechanism, you know, a cap and floor market for longer duration. But in terms of delivering those projects, you're absolutely right. That we've never asked for that. What we've needed is the policy and the regulatory and the market.
And the environment's working. Well, look, it's been fantastic to speak to you this morning. I think there's the message is that there's still the ambition there, but there's a lot to do and a lot of uncertainty and things that need to be worked through during the next decade. But Nina, thank you very much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for asking.